Finish up. I am an armchair adventurer. I enjoy reading all the various stories of adventures from all over the world in all over the time periods. I just finished a book by Hampton Sides called The Wide, Wide Sea. It is a terrific non-fiction account of Cook's last and final voyage, the third one, in which he, quote, discovers, unquote, the islands of Hawaii and attempts to find the Northwest Passage. So I recommend it extremely highly. It's available, of course, from Amazon and probably your public library. Thank you for listening.
Well, this is a first. Usually I have to go around scaring everyone up to get the meeting started, but you're all getting away from me. For those of you that I haven't shaken hands with already, it's 9:45 right now. I'm Margaret Clark, I'm the chairman of the Docent. And my vice chairman is Bob Harrison, who is right there, to whom you owe money if you get one of the manuals. This is Jim Cassidy, our training officer. And the other person you really need to know about her is Rebecca. Rebecca is a museum employee and she is volunteer liaison. And she does everything for us. So those are the people you really need to get a grip on. I wanted to welcome you. We're very glad to see you. And for those of you who are new here, I do need to mention that the coffee and stuff is not free. Please chip in a buck or two. We will be grateful. We have a little treasure chest. It allows us to buy supplies, and later in the year it funds a picnic for the Docents. And what else did I need to tell you? Oh yes, if you wish to carry through with, we are very happy to have people attend our classes. If you wish to become a docent, one of the requirements to be a docent is that you must be a museum member. So if you are not a museum member, you may wish to think about that. It will be coming if you wish to carry on. We don't demand it for today, obviously. We'd just like you to come and join us. I don't think I have anything else that I need to say to people, right? Oh, you've come at a very interesting time. Yes, that is what I did mean to say. The museum's chief executive officer for the last 30 years has been Dr. Ray Ashley. And he's been absolutely wonderful, and we love him to death, and he will be speaking to us today. He will be giving the first talk at 11 o'clock. But he has just retired. After years of saying, I'm going to retire at the end of the year, I'm going to retire at the end of the year. This last year he actually did do it. And we have a new CEO, her name is Dr. Christina Brophy. And for this special occasion, Dr. Brophy will be addressing us by Zoom from Misc. She is winding up things in Misc, but she is our CEO as of now. She is moving to San Diego next month, from what we hear. So she will address us briefly at 11 o'clock, I believe, is the arrangement. After which, 11:15, okay, and after that, Dr. Ashley will speak, and then it will be my turn to tell you about the museum. But that is all I need to tell you right now.
Good morning. Good morning. Hello, family. Happy New Year. I am so glad to see you all back again. And our newbies. Some of our newbies are not so new. Let's see. Where are you, Haley? Xander? Okay. You can sign up. Okay. Oh. He's not here yet. Okay. We have Trent over here. Wave your hand, Trent. Trent is also a crew member here at the museum, so he's crossing over to the right side of volunteers. So good morning, all. Everybody new. I am Rebecca. You may have received short, quick emails from me in the last couple days rounding things up. For some reason, we decided to have a holiday right before the first docent training day, and I had some forced days off over the other holidays. I'm a little behind, don't worry. If you are missing anything, then you're going to hear from me or come see me if I spelled your name wrong, if you didn't have a packet. Don't panic, this is standard museum protocol. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the role of a docent. And in your new packets, you'll also see the other opportunities to volunteer at the museum. So don't feel locked in to one activity. There's a lot to do. So what do docents do? Margaret, will you tell me the meaning of docent?
Docent comes into American English from its German roots, where the word Docent, D-O-Z-E-N-T, means a teacher or a tour guide, and it is one of the very rare German words that came to German from Latin. They have almost no Latin roots. It's the same root as doctor and documentation, if you like.
I was looking at you So here at Maritime Museum, one of the main functions of the docent is to give tours. Some of those tours are going to be kind of ad hoc. You're here, someone wants to know something, you're going to talk to them about it. Or they come through me and they've scheduled a large group. We have groups anywhere from 5 to 60. And for each of those, we try to keep around 10 persons each. And you will walk them through different areas of the museum. Our general tour covers every ship here at the museum and every level of the displays in some way. You're going to be learning a lot about that during these classes. Yes, you can read all the history from the book, but if you are not here and really touching, seeing, and learning and making eye contact, your tour is going to be kind of boring. So that's a definitely thing. One of the main things you have to learn in this class is how to interpret the exhibits. Now, we can tell you something about USS Dolphin, but you may find something in there that you find most interesting, and that's probably what you're going to talk about most. Because, I don't know about you guys, but more than 15 minutes in the Dolphin is too much for me. Most of you have missed the Foxtrot, which I could do in 8 minutes, believe me. Oh, by the way, I started here 23 years ago as a docent. So I was a volunteer, and I'm talking from experience. You always want, when you're on deck, to welcome someone, say hello, may I answer any questions, how can I help you today? Really, you want to encourage that discussion and say, hey, you may enjoy this. And then, we also do a lot of customer service here. All of life is customer service. If you know where the bathroom is and someone asks, aren't you going to tell them? So there's a lot of that here. I mean, great, you have a blue shirt. Oh, do you work here? No, I'm a volunteer. Where's the bathroom? That's all they want to know. But that's okay. That's okay. We have a real need at our events. Now, we don't have as many events as we used to. Who worked with me at Parade of Lights? All right, there's a lot of hands. I could have used probably 6 more. That's 300 people being seated for the dinner at Parade of Lights. We do that again at 4th of July. We have things like concierge nights and things like that, where those folks need direction and tours and things like that. So there's a lot to do. Also, if anyone is computer savvy, doesn't mind collating and filing, the office is always in need of people. Kevin Sheehan in the library, if that is something that interests you, he always needs help in collections, so that's a really big thing. We also do some cleaning. If you see a dirty spot and you come to me, I'll say, okay, there's the window. It's kind of simple. You see a piece of trash, please pick it up. We've got hand sanitizer everywhere, I promise. So just pick it up, toss it away, keep our museum clean. And then just sharing what you found that you loved here the most. I annoy the heck out of my office mates, because below there is a model of a little steam engine. It has a green button. It's sitting right by the office. If I see somebody by that green button, I'm going to go, push the green button, because they get annoyed when I push it all day for myself. But I've been here 23 years. I have sailed the Star of India 14 times, and that is still my favorite thing here. So, a lot of changes, as Margaret said, but they will not change our volunteer program at this point. So just keep up. Someone's going to say, oh, who's the president of the museum? It's going to take me a while not to say Ray Ashley, but I absolutely have met and enjoy meeting Christina Brophy. So she has a lot of vision, she's a lovely person, and you will get to meet her via Zoom today. So the only other thing I will ask you to do, when you have finished your program and loved it and enjoyed it and not left us behind, is to bring someone in. Share the joy, share the knowledge, bring someone in to join these ranks. That's what we want. Now, a little business, if Margaret doesn't mind. Dennis, are you wearing your badge?
Who, me? Yeah? No, I don't have it on right now.
Okay, 2 existing docents. We have these lovely little icebreakers. You know, if you just walk up to me and go, can I help you? I may come. But we have these lovely little things. On one side it says, become a volunteer, and you all know how to do that. And the other side says, ask me about a mini tour. What's a mini tour? Okay, well, I don't have a full tour schedule today. You're on the HMS Surprise. Maybe you're doing deck watch. Take a stroll. Walk them all through Surprise. Give them the opportunity. Give them this little opening to let you do what you came here to do. So I have a few made up right now. Anybody wants one, just let me know and we'll hand them out. All right? Thanks. Oh, by the way, last year we had 267 volunteers give hours. We're a little low on hours. We're only at 65,000. I suspect once I put in all those that people forgot, we'll be a little better. So, good job, folks. I thought Bob was doing logistics.
What?
Aren't you doing logistics?
Don't say no. Don't say yes.
I know, okay. Volgistics, what's that? Some of you got an email from me with your volunteer number. So in the ticket booth, the white ticket booth, you will see a tablet. On that tablet is a keypad. You will put in that number. It will say, hello, is this Dennis Phipps? And he will say, yes. And then it will say, what do you want to do? I want to sign in. You're going to sign in to whatever you're doing today. If you don't know what you're doing, there's actually an option that says, I don't know what I'm doing today. It says, I don't know. And so then you're just going to log that in. They're going to say, is this okay? You're going to say yes. Walk away. When you leave, you're going to come back. It's going to say, is this Dennis? And what do you want to do? Sign out. He's going to sign out. And then he's going to enter his round trip travel. I say this because Dennis is really good at it.
Maybe if I talk to Jim Cassidy about this, we'll do a little quick seminar on this thing online with the television at a future date, like maybe next week or the week after or whatever.
That'd be great. Plus, some of you have met with me before. We had a little orientation. I'm actually kind of missing some folks that I thought were going to be here. We can do that one-on-one. I can do it in groups. We're trying to get every volunteer through an orientation with me to cover everything. Yes, Mr. Preston?
Is this different than the online thing on the computer?
Your computer is for after or from home. So when you come to the museum, it is a requirement that you are logged in and that we know who is here. There are a few people who have dispensation on that, but believe me, those people, we know when they're here. So the logic behind that is if we have an emergency here, we evacuate to across the street. If I don't know you were here, but I think you were here, I'm going to come back and look for you. And if you want to send me back into a fire, I think my husband and son would be very upset about that. So that is one of the main reasons. Your hours are extremely important. It is a requirement to record your hours. Don't worry about today. For the new folks, I will take care of that. And all of our hours have a dollar figure, although you are, as I've said, invaluable. But the average for California volunteerism is $35 an hour. Now, when we are doing grants and matching grants, we say, what would this cost? They're going to say this is the cost of the volunteers that are doing the work. Obviously, we can't pay 267 people $35 an hour. I don't have $35 an hour. Okay. So these are really, really important, and it is a requirement. Plus, on April 17th, we're going to have a big awards night for the top hours, and the levels of hours. So it's a really good dinner. It's better than any members' night dinner you're gonna get. So I do it up for the volunteers. So we just go through that. You're gonna get a little card. Anybody have their volunteer card with?
Yes. Yeah, I got it.
Yep.
I use it on my phone.
Just somebody hold it up, or bring it up here so they can see. Ah, Christian. So you're gonna get a card like this. Hopefully your name will actually be printed on it. I promise we'll get you one. It has your QR code that you can scan in. If you have a phone that does that, you don't have to go into the booth. Just scan it when you pull in or get to the door, and then do it again when you go out. But your number will be on that. That's the number you're gonna need to log in and log out when you're here. And it's really simple. It's a little newer. About the last 18 months I've been enforcing this. It has saved, I think my boss has told me, about 30 hours a month, thank you, Christian, in inputting from paper strips. So it's been really, really good, which is why instead of 2 months from now, I can tell you that we're at 65, 70,000 hours instead of me still inputting months and months worth of sign-in. So it's really not hard. We'll go through it. Anyone who wants to go through it today after your stuff, just let me know. I'll be in my office until about 1 o'clock. And then if you can stay after that, I'll be here to walk you through it.
And Rebecca's mother, so, you know, if you need anything in terms of volunteer, she'll help you. There's a question back there.
Can I say something about the sales coordinator?
Oh, wait a minute, somebody raised their hand
I
first.
thought you were talking to me.
Stand up, Ian.
This is for Rebecca. We couldn't sign in this morning. Why? It wasn't working.
All right, I signed in. It's personal, it's just you, don't worry about it.
I noticed that sometimes it says no internet, and right next to that it says dismiss. Hit dismiss. It's just because it's gone to sleep. Margaret had an issue that I have to figure out because you're not the only one with zeros, so we have to figure out what was going on. So no, and by the way, if there's ever a mistake, don't worry about it. It's fixable. The sun will come up again tomorrow, whether or not it works. Okay? I will never be upset about having to fix or input for you. It's just taken a lot of time off of, actually getting to be with my volunteers and scheduling tours and other activities.
As you can see, we're pretty informal here. Margaret's mother and the rest of us are just families. One of the nice things about being a docent here is that you get close with a lot of people. You can enjoy this part coming down here and just enjoy the company. Ken, you had an answer.
My name is Ken Goldman. I'm the sales coordinator for California and San Salvador. And I think one of the more fun things, opportunities for docents, is to serve as a guide on those ships. We go out for 4 hours on the weekend. I would go into deep water, and it's a very fun tour. And your job as a docent would be to be a guide. You don't have to pull any lines, no work. I like that part, yeah. So in a couple of weeks, I will send a note out to all of the new docents, and if you would like to shadow one of the docents to see what they do on the ships, then send that back to me with your email, and we'll get you scheduled to go with one of the docents to just see what that's like. But it is, to me, one of the more fun opportunities to actually do some real sales. Thank you, Jim.
And Ken's one of probably the best person around to see how dosing is done. He really does a nice program. Richard.
Yes, did you let people know to go there, do their meters? It's 10 o'clock.
Oh, it's 10 o'clock. Oh boy. How many of you have not signed in your meeting?
We already did that.
Every? Anybody has not signed in, raise your hand. The parking along the water here is, there's kiosks spread out there that you have to put your license number in and a credit card, and it pays for your time. Is everybody set on that? Anybody? Yes.
I'd like to mention that we do not own the parking meters, and we do not profit from the parking.
No.
Well, we've seen people get tickets, so.
Yeah, definitely use the meter. It's a 3-hour time period, and we purposefully limit our training periods to just under 3 hours so nobody is in jeopardy of getting the ticket. Okay?
So I came and I put all my information in and my card, and on the screen it came up that the time started at 9:24, and it was in at 12:24, and I'm on the water side, so I kind of don't give the 10 o'clock.
Mine always says 1 o'clock.
Yeah. Mine says 12:24 is the final.
I put my card in at 9:33 and it told me it would expire at 12:33.
Well,
All right, they must have changed it.
Just no,
Right.
choose your time.
You still have the 3-hour time limit. The meter starts charging you at 10 o'clock, but you can, if you get here earlier than 10 o'clock, you can still only stay for your 3 hours. So the meter won't let you buy more time.
That's a big help.
That if you hit the number, again, the time thing, even though it says 12:30 or whatever, you hit it again, it'll go to 1 o'clock.
Yeah, you can add more time.
That's good to
Yeah.
know.
Basically, you punch it to where it gives you the maximum time, and it should say you're paid till 1 o'clock. That's always worked for me there. Anyway, you gotta punch to maximum time, 3 hours. Okay. If you think you're not paid correctly, you may wanna go to your car when you think you're expiring and double check it. So, part of being the docent, we got another question?
Do you want to mention, Jim, about the solar parking on the weekends or not?
No, because you have to have a permit for that, and they're not qualified yet. Okay? Once you become a docent and you come on a Saturday or Sunday, we have donated free parking at the solar lot. So once you become a docent, you get your red badge, then you can get a parking permit for the weekends. Okay? Cover all that? So as I was saying, largely the docents are a big family here, and we build with the sail crew. A lot of us fill multiple roles, as I do. How many of you are sail crew? Yeah, close to 10 people are not only docents, but also sail crew, also volunteer maintenance hours, not only give tours, but we'll participate in helping out special events, so you get to go to all the special events for free. There's a lot of things that you do as a docent or can do, depending upon what motivates you, what excites you. So once people get hooked on this, I mean, like Rebecca said, she's been around longer than I have. Than I am old, as an old, I guess. Well, maybe not quite that. But I've been around 17 years with the museum. But I'm just one of the rookies. There's a lot of guys here in the 20s. Once you get into the culture and see what it's about, you're kind of hooked. It's a very informal process that unlike most museums, that everything's behind the glass with signs that say do not touch. We're just the opposite. We encourage interacting with the ships and the people. If you see something you want to touch, be sure to touch it. It's a very informal process.
Something I forgot when I was up here before. Something I forgot when I was up here before. Denny, it was you who brought it. Cord don't broke, Denny. Denny brought this in from home. He said it's free to a good home. It had a handle on it. It doesn't anymore. But if anybody wants a picture of the whole.
Wow.
Free to good home. So I am told.
I want to put a wire instead of this.
You will want to put something on it, yes.
Take David home with you.
If David doesn't go with it, by the way, the museum is a non-profit organization, whereas basically all major museums, especially maritime museums, are governmentally operated. And they get their money from the government. We don't. We're supported by our membership and what people pay to go on the sales and things like that. So we're quite different. Dr. Ashley is going to talk about the museums at 11 o'clock, but we're unique in many regards. Any questions on all of that? Okay, well, thank you for your interest in becoming a docent. I hope you like what you see, and we'll move on. These are some of our docents that graduated a year or two ago from the docent program. But as you can see, our group here is much larger. At the end of the training, those who graduate from the training get to go on a sail into California for the afternoon. And we have a luncheon there, and we award you your red badges. And so you have that to look forward to. If you don't have a pencil, put this in your phone. You are not here as a security guard. You're here to your eyes, your ears, your hostessing the guests that come here, engaging in conversations, trying to keep people safe, and protecting the museum. But if anything happens of an emergency nature, there's a medical emergency, sometimes you see vandalism, whatever, people that are in places they don't belong, that's the number. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You call those people, they're always here, they'll come over and they'll handle whatever the problem is. Okay? So, you're not here as a security guard. You're not here to get into arguments with obnoxious people. You don't need that in your life. And all you do is, you politely ask people to do what they're supposed to do. If you don't get that kind of compliance, you pick up your phone, you dial that number, and you just back off until the security people arrive. Okay? If there's a medical emergency, they will call ambulances or police or whatever is necessary once they assess the situation. Any questions on all of that? Yes?
I put mine in my phone as AA, so it comes up first. So if there's an emergency and I open my phone, that is the first phone number in there. AA and then MMSD.
You would, Nancy. Nancy's very organized.
Bag on Nancy.
That's a good idea.
Never mind.
Okay. Has everybody got that number?
Because I've had to use it.
Huh?
I've had to use it. I came in here one day and there was a family here with kids. And the teenage kids were having a contest, shimmying up these poles, to see who could get to the top the fastest, while the dad was videotaping it. Security was here in 30 seconds.
Was I one of those? Oh, no problem. Thank you. Okay, any questions on that? Security? Everyone comfortable with that? Okay. All right. One of the things you need to memorize, notice I have it written down, or at least know, might show up on the final exam. We do have an exam, by the way. Is the mission of the museum. So the mission of the Maritime Museum of San Diego is to serve as the community memory. There's a lot to know here, and throughout the 12 weeks that we will be training, you will learn all of that information. Well, not all of it, but a good amount of it. And you will become the memory to all the visitors that come here. And you'll be here to share that. We collect, we preserve, and we present. That's our primary role. We are the presenters. We are the face of the museum to our visitors. Of the rich maritime heritage and historic connection with the Pacific world. So that's what we do. That's who we are. Okay? We're not connected or concerned too much with the Atlantic or the other, but you'll find that everything we do is related to San Diego in one way or the other. Okay? Okay. So I'm not going to read all this to you. I sent you those of you that registered in advance, a welcome package. It has the mission on there. It has the premise of why we exist. You can see them there. You should know those things. All the information that you should know in order to complete the training is in the welcome package. So be sure to go through the welcome package, read it thoroughly, and you'll need to adhere to that in order to get through the program. So I've sent you all the schedule for the 12 weeks, and what to expect to see. On the far right, on the schedule for each week, there are suggested readings out of the Docent manual. Okay? You can either purchase the Docent manual here, but you can always access it online. Up there you see an HTTP hashtag. You can copy that, paste it in your browser, pull it up. That will bring you to the Docent page for the Maritime Museum. The second line down is the Docent manual. Click on that, you have it all online. So if you don't have the hard copy handy and you got a little free time, it's easy to get to. The word suggested reading is a euphemism for you better read it. Okay? Because the exam at the end of the training, you have to pass at a 70% or better level. 70 is not too high, is it? But if you don't read the manual, it's going to be awfully hard. So the lectures are often additional information. It expands on what's in the book, but you at least have to read the book, okay? Because that information will come back to you in the exam. Okay? Any questions on that? Pretty clear? Yeah. If you registered with me or Rebecca in advance of the meeting today, did you?
Yeah, so I was looking at the email that you sent me, and all they got was that, and then a Word document that's like 3 pages long. I'm looking at this is supposed to be something that's extensive with like lots of information. There was a link in the body of the email. So it's a link, so I remember that.
There are two attachments.
This was in the body of the email.
Okay. So if you need the welcome package, you have my email?
Yeah.
Send me a request for the welcome package. I'll send it out again. I may have clicked the wrong button or something. I'm old, stuff happens. Again?
So, We have 4 packages that haven't been picked up, and maybe one of you is here and hasn't noticed. Janice Irvine, Noemi Chow, Kai Brown, and Gary Maple. You're right here. There's your package. Oh, thank you. Yes, Nancy.
I have no any childs. I'm doing the one-on-one training with her.
Okay. Anyone else? So that leaves us down to Janice and
I can say Janice and I'm for mentor.
Okay.
Dr. Cassidy?
Yes.
I wrote it back here, sorry.
Hello?
Hi. You would like us to do these readings prior to each of those meetings?
Yes. That's,
Good deal.
you certainly are going to get a lot more out of the presentations if you've read the docent manual prior to the presentation. If you run out of time, come and listen to the presentation anyway. But you'll need to read it before the exam. Pretty straightforward. Any questions on all that? Okay. So are they suggested readings?
No.
Okay. This is critical. The number one reason why people don't complete the course within the 12 weeks is they procrastinate. Except for me. Two of the requirements to graduate is that you have to shadow on 3 tours. Rebecca sends us the information about when tours are available. You contact Rebecca that you want to shadow. All that means is you want to go along and listen. You don't have to do anything. But you have to show up and listen to the tours and how people present the tours and what the subject matters are and how one deals with the public. You know, basic stuff. But you need to do at least 3 tours before you can get your red badge. Okay? Can't tell you how many people get all the way through, procrastinated, run out of time, pass the exam, but they can't get their badge because they haven't done the tours. Now you can still get your badge, but you still have to do the tours first. So we've had people come back a year later, sit in the audience just like you, and say, yeah, I didn't do that, but I'm going to do it this time. Okay, so, I mean, we do everything we can to help you graduate. But you got to do those 3 tours. Do not procrastinate. Hand in the back.
Yes. So one caveat on the shadow tours, from my personal experience, educational tours, that is school groups, don't count.
Okay.
That's right.
All right, we'll still,
I'm going on the boat.
we assign you a mentor to help you get through and succeed. If that doesn't work, Rebecca and I are always available, as is Margaret. We'll do everything we can, but we can't do it for you. Okay? Sir?
Also, if you have the opportunity to go out sailing as a trainee on Californian or San Salvador, that doesn't count either.
That's true.
It has to be a tour of the entire museum, not
Yes.
not just on one of the ships.
Okay? So after you've done your 3 tours, is that another hand?
No.
Oh, you're just excited. Yeah, I get excited too. It's been about 20 years, but I get excited. You have to lead your own tour. After you've done all 3 of your shadow tours, you may want to wait until all the classes are done. It's up to you. But you want one of the senior docents on the committee. That's Margaret, myself, David, who else? Bob Harrison. Anyway, there's a half dozen of us. We'll go with you, and you will take us on a 2-hour tour of the museum. Sounds like a lot. It's about 10 minutes a boat. Okay? You got a maximum of 10 minutes to tell us something about each book. Okay? At the end of that 2 hours, sometimes you may need a little more study before you redo it. That's okay. No penalty. Most of the time, people handle it just fine. And that's your kind of graduation cherry on the top of the cake. And with that and passing the exam, you become a docent. Okay? There's no real penalties. We're all here to help you pass. We want you to pass. You're the face of the museum. So don't be afraid to come and ask for help if you need it. Okay? Part of our process to help you pass is we try and assign a senior docent to every trainee. Okay? How many of you are mentors? Now, most mentors, unless I've gotten to them, have a little ribbon on the bottom of their badge that says mentor. That means they've been assigned to one of you to help on a personal level along the way. It also means that if your mentor that's been assigned to you isn't available, they are. Those people who volunteered to give extra time to help you with whatever questions you might have. So don't be afraid to ask. How many people that have volunteered as mentors with this class have gotten their ribbons? Who has not? Who has not? Okay. Those of you that have not gotten your ribbons, be sure to come and see me after this presentation. Okay? So, but we do everything we can, including assigning mentors to each of you to be available at your time and availability to help you through the program. Okay, the best for last. I know nobody's wanted to ask any questions yet. Huh?
Green flag for a reason?
Yes. That's because I've come to the end of my tech knowledge. All right, it's 10:30. Are there any other further questions from any of you about anything?
Can you have the docents and their respective, can they match them up, find out who's who over there?
Yes. I hadn't planned to do this little exercise, but we had a little extra time. And there was another question? Who else? Yes.
Yeah, regarding the shadow tours, I'm assuming these are groups that have arranged for a private tour with the museum in advance?
Yes, they will contact Rebecca, and they'll say, we're from so-and-so's educational group, whatever, and we'd like to have a tour of 20 people or 30 people. Rebecca will divide that up into 3. We'll need 3 people to guide the tour, and each person of the docents will take those 10 people on a 2-hour tour, or if they say we only have an hour or an hour and a half, then that's what we'll do. And then she will inform us, and we can have one or more of you tag along with them, and that you fulfilled your requirement for a shadow tour.
Okay, so regarding that, I would contact Rebecca and get assigned to one.
Or Margaret or me, if you can't get hold of Rebecca, we'll make sure you get assigned.
I'm interested also in being in the sail crew. And so the website says you just show up at 8 o'clock on Sunday at the Star Media. But there are classes going on, is that accurate?
Let you see one of us sail crew, we'll explain it to you.
You got some explaining to do.
There's a bunch of us that are also sail crew. When you show up at 8:30 in the morning and raise your hand, that's to say I'm interested in joining the museum. My name is so and so, and then from 8:30 till noon or 1 o'clock, excuse me, you'll be taken around and given a tour of the museum by an experienced sail crew member. There's also an annual training session that's usually in January, starts January, and it's a 3-month, David? 3 months?
We can get into details about that at the break. There are a bunch of people here on the sail crew. Could I ask for a show of hands? Everybody here who's already on the sail crew, just raise your hand.
We already did that.
A lot of people. We have to talk about that more with you at the break.
Yeah, so there's a formal training class just like for docents that you'll go through. Starts in January, it's every Sunday. It's going on right now, as a matter of fact. There are multiple roles. I serve in about 6 roles for the museum, and plenty of things to keep you interested in busy.
Can I just add, the class helps, but you don't have to take the class in order to join sales.
But as with us, if you take the class and read the manual, you do better. And you read minds. Okay, last questions, we all done? All right, Margaret has some. Yeah.
It was suggested to me that I tell you, those of you who don't know, what the banner is about. The banner over there tells you a story. We used to have a wonderful docent, Ron Bon. He left us a few years ago, and that banner was made for him. Ron was a great storyteller. He worked for 60 Minutes in the research department. He had 3 Emmys for, and he was so good at telling stories. And that was his slogan: tell me a story. It's what we do. So.
Because the new president and CEO of the meeting, Dr. Christina Brophy, is going to call in on a Zoom call simply to say hello and introduce herself to you. Until that happens, we're going to postpone Dr. Ashley's presentation a few minutes. And then after Dr. Brophy, Dr. Ashley is going to give us his presentation on the history of museums. We'll take a 10-minute break after that. And then our chairperson, Margaret, will give her presentation on the history of our museum. In the meantime, we've got a gentleman here that is going to give us a few words of entertaining wisdom.
I'm not sure how wisdom they are. My name is Bill, and I've been a docent for, 10 or 15 years. With that was Steve. Where's Steve back there? Long time ago. Okay. Can you hear me? I taught a class in high school called Literature of the Sea for about 25 years at Dana Point, and I have about 600 nautical books. I've written notes on books. I loaned a lot of books to a lot of you guys, so if you want to read a particular book, see me, and I probably have it somewhere. I do some fun stuff with nautical terms. So here's one. It's called limey. If you call somebody a limey. As far back as 1795, lime juice was used in the British Navy as an anasorbic or protective against scurvy. After about 50 years, Americans and Australians began calling English ships and sailors lime juicers, later limeys. The term limey was eventually applied to all Englishmen, and today the designation of the story behind it is widely known. Originally a contemptuous term, an international slur, limey is now a rather affectionate designation. So Margaret, I would ask you, if I called you a limey, which you are, is that affectionate, or are you going to kick me in the rear end? What? Anyway, that's it.
The Brits have been called worse.
Who was it? Was it Tommy? You told me you just read about the 1600s, about a big battle.
4-day battle, 1666.
Yeah. This is called at loggerheads. So you guys know if you're at loggerheads with somebody what that means? Okay. Loggerheads are marine turtles in warm parts of the Atlantic, but the big knobby-headed turtles have nothing to do with the expression at loggerheads. Engaged in violent quarrel or dispute, that's what it means. If you're engaged in a dispute or a violent quarrel, you're at loggerheads with somebody else. Even though, at loggerheads seems to refer to a medieval naval battles during which sailors bashed each other with murderous instruments called loggerheads. These loggerheads were long-handled devices with a solid ball of iron on the end that was heated and used to melt pitch or tar, which would be flung at the enemy. The loggerheads themselves apparently made for handy lethal weapons. After the boiling pitch was used up, the mariners from opposing ships probably engaged each other with them, being at loggerheads. They're smashing each other with these violent pieces of wood with metal at the end. Loggerhead also has an earlier meaning of an ignorant blockhead or knucklehead, and this idea of stupidity most likely contributed to the popularity of the phrase that suggests that people at loggerheads in a dispute are headstrong and unwilling to compromise.
Bill, you're done. You're done.
Thank you.
Turn that off. Courtesy.
Running away from everybody. Are you ready for me?
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Well, hi everybody. I'm sorry I had to close the door. I'm dog sitting today for my daughter, so he would run in here and start barking. But welcome everybody. So I'm Dr. Christina Connett Brophy, and please call me Christina. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there with you guys today in person, but I'm still in Connecticut getting life together, reorganized to move out west. So we'll be out there in the next couple of weeks. Janelle, you look concerned. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Oh, okay, no worries. But yeah, so I will be out there in the office on February 3rd, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you all in person at that time. I've been working with Docent crews for quite a number of years, and you really are the lifeblood of every organization, to be that front line and giving your time and giving people that really human connection to the stories that we tell. So I just want to thank you very, very much for all of your hard work and dedication towards that end. And I have not read the entire handbook yet myself, but I do have a copy of it. So I will be learning along with you and looking forward to hearing all the things you have to teach me as well. And just quickly about me, just so you're familiar, and I'm sure many of you already know Ray Ashley, but I was very fortunate to be brought in as the new president and CEO of the Maritime Museum of San Diego earlier this year. And I was out for about a week, a couple weeks ago, and then I'll be out there on February 3rd full time, moving across the country from Misc Seaport Museum, where I have been senior vice president for the last 4 years. If you have not been to Misc Seaport, it's a fantastic place. It's quite different from Maritime Museum in that not everything floats, and we struggle with a lot of our own concerns with sea level rise and historic ships, but I do have quite a lot of experience with exhibitions, fundraising, maintaining historic ships, and I'm a steadfast sailor for many, many years. So I'm truly dedicated to trying to maintain the wonderful legacy that Ray and his predecessors have established at the Maritime Museum in San Diego. I had a fabulous sail on the San Salvador a couple weekends ago with my husband. It was absolutely wonderful, and it was such a great crew. And I'm just looking forward to learning more about all of these great vessels in San Diego as I move forward. So before Mystic Seaport Museum, I was at the New Bedford Whaling Museum for about 6 years as their chief curator. But there also, I did a lot of work in fundraising and academics and publishing, and started a lot of programs and partnerships with the U.S. Navy, with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, with many other organizations of like minds. So I certainly will be looking at doing a lot of that same type of work in San Diego as I have already done at Mystic Seaport. I was raised on a research vessel called the RV Geronimo out of a prep school at St. George's School in Newport, Rhode Island. Grew up mostly in the Caribbean and the Bahamas primarily, but throughout the Atlantic Basin. And I lived on that boat most of my childhood. My dad just finally retired at the age of 81 from tagging turtles in the Bahamas as part of an offshoot of that project. So I have a lot of experience at sea, mostly in the Atlantic, but I did in fact live in San Diego in the 90s for a couple of years during the America's Cup for Bill Koch and the America Cubed campaigns, which both my brother and my ex-husband both worked for. And my brother got married right where you're sitting, so I have a very strong connection to the Berkeley. I had mentioned to some of the volunteers that my mother passed when she was quite young, but I have a very vivid memory of her dancing in that room at my brother's wedding. So it's a very truly special place in my heart on the Berkeley. So again, sorry I'm not there in person, but I do very much hope that you will come visit me in my office when I get settled. Please feel free to email me. It's ccbrophy@sdmaritime.org. Jeanette can certainly connect you with me. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, what your hopes and dreams are for your time participating with the museum in the future. And I will be speaking with you in person later on down the training line and stepping in on as many classes as I have time to do. But please let me know, does anyone have any questions while I am sort of there, virtually at least?
Welcome.
Looking forward to it.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. It's wonderful to see your faces, even from thousands of miles away, and I look forward to connecting with you in person very soon. Thanks again for all of the dedication you're putting in for the museum this year. I appreciate it very much, as does the rest of the team. So have a great rest of your day, and I will see you hopefully in a few weeks.
3 cheers for Christina!
Hooray!
Hooray! Hooray!
Hi, good morning everyone. Thank you, Jim, for inviting me to speak just for a minute, although I think it was probably impromptu, right? We're just filling in. But yeah, I'm Kevin Sheehan. I work in the library. I've been here about 19 years. And my other jobs, it depends really on the day of the week and what hour of the day that is, because we all wear different hats here from day to day, from time to time. And so I also work in curation, help design and put into place some of the exhibits that you'll see around the museum. I also edit our journal, our peer-reviewed journal called Maitzel Hall, which comes out annually at the moment. I'm working on the 2023 edition. 2024 edition, I should say, which is going to come out in a few weeks' time. That'll be available for most members virtually or through a digital format, and also via print edition in our bookstore and for membership at a certain level. On top of that, what else do I do? Well, I look after all the three-dimensional artifacts that don't literally float in the water. I guess that's the best way of saying it, because I don't get my hands into the boat side of things, but I do look after all the ship models, all the documentary materials, all the instruments that we have on display and so on. And I'm very, very happy to receive your feedback regarding what we could do better, either with our displays or with our interpretations or whatever. I also handle all the donations that come into the museum for our collection, and I'm more than happy to show you behind the scenes at some time or other. We can arrange to do that. to show you what we don't put on display for various reasons. Either we don't have the motive to do that, or we don't have the space, or we don't have the time, or it just doesn't fit with what we want to actually interpret out in the public arena. So I do various jobs. I rely tremendously on the help of volunteers, some of whom have come from the docent pool, or from the sales training pool, to maintenance pool, to help me in the collections and library. And so, again, please feel free to come down to the library at any time. If I'm there, I welcome you in, show you around, and show you some of the resources we have at your disposal as museum members and especially as docents. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And really, in spite of his difficulty with the English language, having come from Australia, Kevin is really a pleasure to work with. He's almost always down in the library, first deck at Berkeley. Okay, so at this point we're running a different schedule today, but I'm inviting our second speaker today, former CEO and president of the Maritime Museum of San Diego for 30 plus years, my mentor and good friend, Dr. Ray Ashley.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everybody. So I've been retired for 2 weeks now. Do I look more relaxed? Yeah. Okay. It might have just been the two, but Christina actually looks a lot more nervous than the last time I saw her too. So there's a bit of a balancing effect going on. Anyway, so this is my favorite thing that I do every year is get to talk to you guys. And it's even more fun when you're retired and I get to talk to you guys. So that's all into the good. So Margaret's talk is going to follow mine. And so what my talk is about, which many of you have heard this before numerous times, I never use notes, so they're always a bit different because my memory isn't what it used to be. So anyway, my talk is going to be about the history of museums and how they started, how people started collecting things and institutionalizing that practice, and the interplay almost from the very beginning between that history and maritime activity. And talk about the history of museums, not about the history of our museum, but then a bit about what we are right now. That leaves a really big gap, and so Margaret is going to fill in the history of our museum. So hopefully these two things dovetail really nicely, or I think they certainly will. In any case, so here we are, we're here at the Maritime Museum of San Diego, and one of the things, well, I should say, we tend to operate on basic premises. One of the premises that doesn't get mentioned often, but it is typically an inherent part of most of the exhibits we do, most of the main halls we do, the educational programs we do, is this concept right here. If I can get it to work. There we go. That the world we live in was not inevitable. Now that sounds kind of obvious, really. It's almost like a, fortune cookie statement. But the truth is that is contrary to the way history is normally presented. Because history is the search for cause, to explain why things happen the way they did. And that's what makes it useful, and that's certainly what academic history is about. But once you've done that, and once you've sat through a number of history classes and you've been exposed to that version of history, the explanation for why things happened the way they did starts to morph into it couldn't have gone any other way, and there's this sense of inevitability about it. And from that, there's another kind of a psychological, morph where we all feel like that we are just following a script, where there's all these giant forces and we really have no say in those things. And that everything that happened has already been determined because of all of this huge, complex series of events that build on one another, inevitably towards some outcome. But that isn't really the way experience works, and we all know that too, that we do have a role in our own lives, in other people's lives, institutions, and in history itself. And one of the things you can do with a museum and artifacts and historic sites and locations that is a little bit easier to do than any book, because a book is a chronology where once again things happen one thing after another. Those places can actually take you back to moments in time where you can imagine not knowing what the outcome was going to be, and knowing that the people then at that time really made the world that we live in, and that the world we live in wasn't inevitable. And that's really empowering, particularly when you are presenting this in educational programs to young people. that what you're trying to do is confront the notion that they're getting on a regular basis, that really everything has already been predetermined, so just follow the script and don't make a fuss. And in fact, you know, the world is yours to make. And I think museums are really good at doing that, and particularly because of the centrality of maritime endeavor to history, maritime museums are particularly well situated to do that. So when I say things weren't inevitable, it sounds, again, very abstract, but consider this real thing. On the day of the Star of India, her launch in 1863, technological marvel, maybe 100 metal-hulled ships in the world at that time. She was a large vessel with a large carrying capacity that actually was many times what any other means of transportation could achieve. The equivalent of you know, numerous wagons, numerous people hauling stuff. You could carry 1,200 tons of cargo 100 miles a day with a tiny crew. And to do that, it increased the value of all the goods that were traded over the ocean and made the ship itself, the conveyance itself, a valuable asset because you changed the value enormously of the things you're carrying. So it was worth building something that involved a fair amount of risk, and indeed that was a risky activity. When the Star of India was launched in 1863, the actuarial tables of the day predicted a lifespan of about 12 years for a ship of this size and this kind of service. Now that wasn't because they wore out necessarily, or they became obsolete because of, you know, technological change. It was because the world was a dangerous place for a ship like this to live, and something was going to hit them sooner or later. The Star of India had 3 sister ships built to the same design, launched in the Ramsey shipyard, and those other 3 ships lived a normal lifespan of 10 to 15 years. And that's what this one, the Euterpe, is there a flashing thing? Okay, that's what this one was expected to do. And that's what would have been considered more or less inevitable. What no one ever could have predicted was this picture more than a century later sailing into San Diego Bay. You know, it would have been completely astonishing to anybody of the day that a ship intended to last 10, 12, 15 years would be there. Now, she was 160 years old last time we sailed. The oldest that any ship has ever gotten to be regularly sailing. To put things in another way, when the Star of India was launched, there were approximately 10,000 large sailing ships in British registry that you could have looked up in the Lloyd's Register. And what you're looking at there is a sole survivor. So the odds were long indeed. So it really is special, and then stop to consider all the other vessels around here which have the same background. Their survival was unlikely, their accumulation in one place was unlikely. So we have really an amazing opportunity to present that notion of a world that wasn't inevitable, because this place wasn't inevitable, the collection of all these ships. So telling that story and engaging people with the excitement of moments in the past where people didn't know what was going to happen, it's kind of what you guys do. You know, you take people back to that moment in time, situate them there, and fill them with the excitement of not knowing how it's going to turn out, you know. So we go through we have a lot of kind of documents that explain what we do and how we do. This is our mission statement. Just out of curiosity, how many of you were at that last members meeting? Right? Okay. So I've been carried for 30 years what I thought the mission statement was, and I finally told you guys. But this is the formal one. And I'm not going to read it to you because it kind of makes for dull reading. The point is that as I make it out, we've raised about $100 million in the 30 years that I've been here. And that mission statement was really super helpful in doing that. Not because it catches you, you know, where you live. It's because it tends to define what we do. And it's been helpful in determining what we don't do. If someone calls up and says, you just got to collect this ship, you can say, well, does this fit our mission or not? Or you really ought to do an exhibit on slavery in the Atlantic world. Well, that would be a good exhibit for an Atlantic World Maritime Museum, but maybe not for us. Because if you end up being a museum of anything and everything, you kind of dissipate your focus, and you know, the stories you tell stop being as compelling because of that. So that's the mission statement, and that works really well in grants and things like that, and it works well to define what we do. We have a kind of a premise statement that the history of human achievement is defined by our historical relationship with the sea. Not only does the sea determine the progress and shape of our civilization, but understand that relationship and our responsibilities for the stewardship of the oceans. I'm going to have to move this down. determine our future. The relationship can't be understood or defined in purely scientific terms. Cultural events are dominant influence. So if you encounter the maritime world presented in an institutional setting today, I'm not talking about going to the beach or going sailing or sport fishing or something, walking into an institution where you're being presented some aspect of the oceans, most of the time that's in one of two different kinds of institutions, either an aquarium or a maritime museum, okay? If you go to an aquarium, every aquarium you go into just about, the main subject is climate change, rising oceans, global warming, ocean acidification, destruction of reefs, all of these bad things that are happening because of human activity. And so in those stories, the ocean is presented as the heroic main character, and the protagonist is man, right? And so people are doing all these horrible things to the ocean that we need to correct or reverse or somehow change. If you go into a maritime museum, though, the ships are like the heroic beings, and they're up against this implacable or relentless enemy, the sea. And so the story is this heroic struggle in which the ships themselves are these play the principal roles. And that's most of the stories you see here. But the truth is, unless you can reconcile those two things, you really aren't ever going to get the whole picture, because if indeed what you see in this aquarium, that these things they didn't just happen, did they? There's a story there. There's a whole long story of human interaction with the sea going back thousands of years. That if you don't understand how that came about, you're not really well equipped to understand how to correct any problems that are ensuing thereby. Likewise, the ocean that our ships are in has also been ever a sustaining world. And all of the stories would be impossible without the ocean and without one that sustains us. So reconciling what aquariums say and what maritime museums say is a really important thing for our future. And so we try to do things like that. So the Rising Tides exhibit we had not too long ago, that was an effort to do so. Some of our festivals of sail have had the Pacific garbage patch problem highlighted. We had an exhibit with photographers that were several years ago called Fragile Waters, including some of the first works by Ansel Adams that tried to do that. So melding those two things together and the partnerships that we should be forming with aquariums and such is a pretty important part of our future also. Okay, and then there's that's the premise that I just read you, so let's go to another picture here. And then just a statement, a vision statement. Become a great institution that signifies and celebrates the history and culture of the sea. Now we've had these documents and these statements for a long time. They were formed as a result of focus groups, and they've been holding pretty well all along. But in any case, they've been useful, and they've been useful defining what we do and what we aspire to. So we didn't just fall into this, of course. There's a long history to this, and it begins a long time ago. So if we want to look for the first thing that we know about that would be a museum in the sense that we understand it today, we have to go back to the ancient city of Alexandria, founded at the delta, at the Nile, when the Nile exits kind of into the Mediterranean, founded by one of Alexander, of course that's why it's Alexandria, one of his generals, Ptolemy, in the 3rd century BC. That happened to be a fortuitous location because it sat at the intersection of a number of significant trading routes from China all the way across to Europe. And interestingly, in the ancient world, China was much more connected to Europe than it was in the medieval period, or even the beginnings of the early modern period. The Silk Road, but also the maritime routes, particularly up the Red Sea, linking all the Indian Ocean and ports of the Indian Ocean from the Straits of Malacca, and China through the Straits of Malacca, up the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, and then over to the Nile, and then out through Alexandria, and of course all the trading routes of the Mediterranean. So it was well situated, and in this particular city, they developed institutions that reflected that almost international intersection of peoples and ideas and cultures. So there was a great lighthouse, because it was a great port, a lighthouse called the Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the world. So a great library with thousands of volumes. I I forget what it is, it's like 4,000 volumes, something that was way more than 40,000. Sorry, 1 million volumes, that was it, in Alexandria Library. I told you my memory isn't that great. That library burned down 3 times over the course of its history, so maybe it wasn't always in 1 million volumes. And an institution called the Museum. And it was a combination of a university, a medical school, a research institute, an astronomical observatory, and actually a place where things were collected. So people would go out on these voyages and they would find stuff, both natural things and man-made things, and bring them to Alexandria, where what was being presented is like a compendium of the natural world and all the world's cultures. And this was the one place where that began to solidify as a concept. It wasn't just the library. Information wasn't in just books. Information is also contained in things, in natural objects, and in the physical objects that people make. And if you could compare them and understand them, you then learn a lot about the span of human culture. And it was vied with the library itself as being one of the great institutions of the ancient world, and of course the model from which, you know, all modern museums come. That evolved in people's imagination. It went away. Alexandria was destroyed several times, and the museum persisted for only a few centuries. It came back again, kind of, in the imagination of this guy, Francis Bacon. He was a powerful politician in Elizabeth's court. He is also known as Lord Verulam, and he was a member of the scientific establishment of his day. And this was also a time when people were starting to write science fiction. So Thomas More's Utopia or Campanella's City in the Sun, those were all these hypothetical sort of pseudo-scientific invention societies that really were reflections of present society. So Francis Bacon wrote this book called New Atlantis, and he based it on ancient Alexandria, and he kind of merged that with the notion of this mythical city that was the epitome of human civilization that disappeared beneath the waves. And so he resurrected this imaginary place, and in New Atlantis, the key institution of that society was its museum. And the leaders of Atlantis were all what they were called philosopher kings. They were scientists and historians, academics and intellectuals. And Atlantis was hidden someplace in the ocean. No one could find it, but Atlantis itself, in like fashion to Alexandria, sent ships out to the far corners of the earth to gather everything and bring it back where it can be compared. And that set a model for what emerged as the Royal Society, which are the Philosophical Society of London, the Royal Philosophical Society of London, who turned their attentions to not only the natural world, but the artificial world as well. And it had a lot of illustrious members like Isaac Newton, and they were interwoven and supported by the British royalty in similar fashion to the Academy of Sciences in Paris. And if you were well-to-do, involvement and participation in the scientific enterprise was a kind of an aristocratic thing to do, where you got notoriety for it. Well, after the end of the 7 Years' War, the British decided that they were going to actually sort of use the Royal Society, combined with Bacon's notion of New Atlantis, and bring into being a kind of a new nation-state formula that relied upon science as useful knowledge, and using knowledge and information as a way of magnifying their power and the reach of empire. And so this began the Enlightenment voyages, or the age of the Enlightenment voyages. Captain Cook was probably the foremost practitioner of that, but there are others like Bougainville as well. And these voyages typically had some specific purpose in mind. So Captain Cook's first voyage in the Endeavour in 1767 was to do a couple things. One was to observe the transit of Venus across the face of the sun. That happens in pairs about every 8 years, pairs 8 years apart every 237 years or something like that. Anyway, by doing that, you could determine the proportions of the solar system and in the universe. The other purpose was to search for the imaginary southern continent that people believed had to exist far to the south because they thought there was so much landmass in the north of the Earth that the Earth would just tip over if there wasn't something down there to balance it. So they went looking for that. Ironically, Antarctica is there actually, but it wasn't placed there to keep the Earth from tipping over. It just happens to be there. Captain Cook never found it anyway. So in any case, Cook went on 3 voyages, and then after following him, there were other explorers that did the same thing. And in the course of these, he collected all this stuff, flora and fauna specimens, and also languages and dictionaries, and then artifacts that people created, and brought all this stuff back. And a lot of well-to-do people started sometimes accompanying these explorers, like Sir Joseph Banks, pictured here, who was a prominent member of the Royal Society and president for many years, and kind of led the scientific enterprise. And therefore, by that means, science in its day became somewhat of a taking inventory enterprise. Let's go out and scan the whole world, find out what's in it, bring it back, and see how it all relates to each other. And from that, you get things like the Linnaean classification systems that identify all life on Earth according to a schema. You have the periodic table of elements. You have all these organizational schemes that we understand our natural world. But you also get similar hierarchies having to do with cultures and artifacts and things, also with languages. So it stimulated a whole massive explosion of interest just in knowledge in general, and the scientists were leading the way. But it was a taking inventory type of science that after a while graduated into actually using experiment and theory to explore the natural world more deeply. And it was, of course, present in most European nations, particularly France and England, but it also migrated across the United States, where the counterparts to the Royal Society also existed. And in similar fashion, it was based on voyages, because America, particularly after the Revolution, was finding its own way as a trading center. And American ships began to vie with the East India Company in penetrating markets in India and China. And sea captains in all these New England places would go out and gather stuff, and they would bring it back. Now, when the British had done this a couple generations earlier, they brought this stuff back, and many of these well-to-do people had these amazing things in their houses, and they would have a room in their house called a curiosity cabinet that had all the cool things that they had collected, their souvenirs, if you will. Well, the kids inherit that stuff and they don't want it, so they have to give it to somebody, and that's how the British Museum started, really, was taking all that stuff that nobody wanted. When these American sea captains began in the late 18th century began doing the same thing, they would also have curiosity cabinets, and they would bring all this stuff back. The first such museum type of place was what you're looking at here, the East India Marine Hall, which is now sort of like the founding building of the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. It's the first real museum building where all this stuff was arranged, because these people would leave it there. Interestingly, it's not there now, but a few years ago, right on this wall here, there's a picture of a famous oceanographer and scientist, Matthew Maury. Anybody with that familiar name? Anybody remember him? He kind of founded oceanography. Okay, well, he took a break from being in the U.S. Navy between 1861 and 1865 and joined the other side. And so between 1861 and 1865, Maury's portrait right there hung with its face to the wall, and on the back of the painting it said traitor. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing. Anyway, it's not there now, so maybe they got mad at him again, who knows. In any case, this kind of established museums as a central piece in prominent towns. Membership in societies like this, in museum societies, was a way of identifying yourself as a member of the social well-to-do and the social elite and the well-connected. So that actually expanded beyond just seafaring to other people. So this guy here, Charles Wilson Peale, who was one of the most prominent American portrait artists of his day. He did many famous portraits of George Washington and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. He also liked collecting stuff, but he didn't quite have the somewhat elitist attitude of the East India Marine Society. He thought museums, every town, every city ought to have a museum, and anybody ought to be able to go there. So he was prominent in Philadelphia. He began collecting all this stuff, and he created the first public museum in the United States, which was just called the Peale Museum. After a while, it was called the Philadelphia Museum. its first place where it lived was in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And the first large museum exhibition to take place took place there, and it was the first full-scale reconstruction of a mastodon that had been excavated, and Peale helped participate in that. He later moved it to this building in Philadelphia, and that kind of set the model for identifying things, collecting things, and how you use stuff to tell stories and engage the public. Well, as the world moved on, and the world became, to more people, seemingly more and more a technological marvel, people were all interested in stuff, just because new stuff was coming out all the time, like typewriters and reapers and, the sewing machines and things like that, and revolvers. Well, the country that led the world in technological innovation, or so it thought itself at the time, and made a good argument for it, was Britain. And so Britain decided to house the world's first international exposition in 1851 in this building called the Crystal Palace. It was in 1851, it was 1,851 feet long, and it was supposed to showcase all the world's cutting-edge technology, in which they thought it would be obvious that Britain was the most advanced country in the world. But what surprised everyone was the fact that there were these things showing up like Remington's revolver and McCormick Reaper and the Remington typewriter and Singer sewing machine, all these things. And also this boat that sailed across the Atlantic and took this really ugly looking cup away, right? Called the America's Cup. Carl is going to give a talk on that in a few weeks. In any case, that shocked everyone, and the fact that American technological ingenuity was perhaps the rival or the equal of Britain. And in 1851, the United States, for the first time, had a merchant fleet that in tonnage exceeded Britain's merchant fleet and became the largest merchant fleet in the world. So kind of Americans stole the show there, but there was this maritime connection. Well, Americans loved that, and they wanted to have other exhibitions. Meanwhile, a couple other things that happened. The first large donation or bequest in American history for a public institution came about in the 1840s with a guy named Smithson, who was actually going to donate a lot of money to the British Museum, but there were strings attached to it, and the British Museum said, no thank you. And so he said, okay, well, to hell with you, I'm going to go to the United States and give them all my money. So he did, and that started the Smithsonian Institution. And his idea was to establish a scientific institution. So the Smithsonian, which we think of now as this collection of museums, really was the first scientific research institute in the United States. And the first director or president was this guy, Joseph Henry. He was a physical chemist from Yale. And the Smithsonian was supposed to be engaged in all sorts of experimentation and physics and things like that, but there weren't enough scientists like that in the United States at the time to make a serious go of it. So they thought, well, let's get our start the same way the British did, which by this time did have a lot of scientists. We'll just be an institution that uses science as a taking inventory kind of thing, as they did in the Enlightenment during Cook's era. And in consequence, the United States sent out this international exploring expedition, the Wilkes expedition, much along the lines of Cook's voyages. And the ships went out as a fleet, and then they separated different spots. They sailed around the world, and they collected all of this stuff, physical specimens and artifacts, and brought it back. And this castle building was the place they stuck it all, okay? And that was the original building of the Smithsonian. And housed the first exposition, including the first grand exposition in the United States, the Centennial Exposition of 1876. And that happened at the Smithsonian. Well, the notice of expositions continued to catch on, and it merged with the City Beautiful movement during the Progressive era. And there was a belief that cities were really, well, first of all, not a belief, cities were awful, horrible, deadly places. It wasn't until about 1925 that any city in the world didn't kill more people than could be reduced through natural process. No city would have survived had there not been people moving in from the country all the time for the opportunities. But cities just killed lots of people. And they were horrible places to live for a lot of people. And so during the Progressive era, there was this notion that you could actually socially engineer a new society if you just were intelligent about urban design. And so cities were planned. Sometimes they got to be planned over again when people's cows knocked lanterns over and it set the whole city on fire and burned it up, like happened to Chicago in 1890. And in other places they couldn't remake the whole city, but they took whole blocks of buildings and mowed them down and put beautiful parks like Central Park. And so this progressive era projection became part of the city's beautiful movement that all cities ought to be planned, and they all ought to have certain features. They ought to have sewage systems, running water, flush toilets if possible. They ought to have decent roads, and there ought to be decent lighting, and there ought to be cultural things that make life worth living, like opera houses and symphonies and libraries and also museums. And so on, these expositions were attempts to highlight the values of the progressive era and demonstrate them. And even then, there was this maritime connection. The next great exposition was Chicago in 1893. It was right on the lake, and if you've been to the Field Museum or the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, those buildings came from that exhibition. And of course, in our case, if you go up to Balboa Park, those buildings came in a very similar fashion to the 1914 exposition, our own version of the City Beautiful movement. Well, this was 1893. It was really supposed to be in 1892, but they couldn't get their act together in time, so it was 1893. So it was the 400th centennial of Columbus's voyage. So they wanted to have Columbus replica ships. So they had appearing for the first time 3 ships that people imagined looked like what Columbus must have been sailing across the Atlantic. Now we don't think they looked anything like it. They didn't last very long, but they were the hit of the show. Everyone loved them. And when all the stuff about Columbus discovering America came out, the people, both the people of Scandinavian descent in the United States and actual Scandinavians in Norway couldn't stand the idea that people thought Columbus had discovered America when in fact the Vikings had done that in the 11th century. So they created a Viking ship which sailed all across from the Atlantic and to Chicago. And it was also a star of the show, competing with the Columbus ships. But again, a maritime connection. That ship later moved around all over the place and is, I think, in a barn in Indiana right now. Some of you may not know this, but when the Star of India came to San Diego, she carried a Viking ship with her on the deck from the exposition in San Francisco. It went up to Balboa Park, and then some college students burned it for a prank, so we don't have a Viking ship anymore. In any case, the notion, though, of these things don't exist, but you could recreate the world that they lived in by recreating the ship really took hold. And so if you don't have the actual ship, you can, just like they do in Jurassic Park, get the DNA, and you can have dinosaurs again, and you can see what the world was like. And so preserving historic ships began to be a really popular thing to do. First of all, because of their association with important people and places, like the victory in the Battle of Trafalgar, but also signature pieces of technology in their own right. And some of these, especially from the industrial age, did survive, as the HMS Warrior and the SS Great Britain in Bristol did. And so these were effective at presenting the world because ships are like a whole world in microcosm. They're like the whole world that produced them. And you can step into that world by stepping onto the deck of a historic ship. Well, you don't always get to keep the ones that you would prefer to have, so you can just go out and make your own. And all of these ships, except for the Elizabeth II in the upper left, have actually visited here. And one of them we have here now. Of course, we have replica ships here. We have the Surprise over there, and we have the California, and we have the San Salvador. So if you don't have the actual ship, you can do a pretty good job by making a sailing version of the ship you wish you'd had all along, and that's kind of what we did. And they also are capable of stepping back in time. And they're our main element of storytelling, the ships themselves. So moving from that into museums in general expanding, and then into maritime museums continuing to flourish. We are a maritime museum. There's lots of things we do. Obviously, we preserve things. Ships are hard to preserve, so we have our task cut out for us because that consumes about half our budget. We collect things, and we have thousands of artifacts in collections, models, paintings, uniforms, tools, weapons, cruise ship paraphernalia, and small craft, and so on. So we collect lots of things, and we have them out on exhibit, many of them at any one time. We produce exhibits. Now I added up recently, and we produced almost 100 exhibits in the last 30 years. So tipper exhibitions, so that's about 3 exhibitions a year on average. So it's quite an aggressive exhibition schedule that we've been producing, and some of the things we produce have been really super cutting edge. So we did an exhibit a few years ago called Three Voyages to Paradise, Cook, Melville, and Gauguin. We thought it was going to be a blockbuster. Had people lined up all the way down to Midway. Well, we didn't get as many people as we thought, but it went from here to the Getty, and the Getty pulled out. And it went from there to the Bowers, to the Autry Museum. There was one museum up in San Francisco. And at each of these museums, packed in tens of thousands of people. We didn't get in here because people weren't expecting that a little maritime museum like ours would have the largest number of original works by Paul Gauguin of any museum in history. So they just didn't believe it. So anyway, we do lots of exhibitions, and we have our core exhibits, but we have these tipperings that we do all the time that we think keep bringing an active audience back in. We do events. Some of the events we've done, like the festivals of sail, were the largest public events ever to take place on San Diego's waterfront. We've had boat building events. We've had painters doing plein air paintings. We have the Parade of Lights and the Big Bay Boom. We have all kinds of events that go on all throughout the year. We do publications, and from the time that the American Neptune ceased being published by the Peabody Essex Museum in, I believe, 1997, until just this year, Mainsail Hall was the only academic peer-reviewed publication devoted to maritime history in the United States. And some of the Mainsail Halls that we have, that we published have been the cutting edge. They've been the definitive version of that subject matter. Most historical journals don't have themes. They just, whoever sends their papers in, they get published. But Kevin works really hard on making sure that every Mainsail Hall is its own theme, and that means those Mainsail Halls stay in libraries, they stay on people's shelves, and they're referred to in people's academic research. And sometimes they're the most comprehensive compendium of information about that particular subject. We do our own research, including, in this case, where we participated in excavating a Manila galleon that wrecked on the shores of Baja in 1574, where we recovered thousands of artifacts and did several exhibits about that. We do other research of different kinds. We do educational programs. We have 10,000, 12,000 kids a year come through for living history programs. We do a program for the Navy where we take newly minted bosun's mates and they learn what life was like, years ago in the age of sail, which doesn't resemble their life now very much, but they get to learn that. We do programs for little kids, and we constantly do our Square Rigger 101 class every 2 or 3 years, where we teach a whole crew how to sail our ships. Education is on an ongoing basis on the ships going out. You are all here for a class as demonstration of what we do for education. And we even taught, celestial navigation and other kind of technical skills. So there's always some sort of education program going on at our museum. We even do shipbuilding when we are when we lose our sense of judgment. In any case, so we even build our own ships. That's not normal for museums. Most museums get ships someone else has built. Most of them don't just go out and build their own. And there's a reason for that. It's not easy to do. So, but we did it anyway, and there she sits back there, And so it is another pretty amazing accomplishment. We operate our ships. Our vessels get underway about 600 times a year. Some of those are just bay cruises on the swift boat or the pilot. Some of them are out of area cruises on the San Salvador, the Californian, and some are kind of adventure sails out on the bay and in the ocean over a course of a few hours, again on the Californian and the San Salvador typically. So we operate our ships more than most maritime museums do. And of course, the ships that we operate are just amazing things. The Star of India, the oldest active ship in the world. We last sailed her, not this last November, but the November before that when she was 160 years old. So about every 5 years we sail the Star of India. We have that ship we're on now, the Berkeley. Western extremis of the Southern Pacific Railroad, an amazing vessel in her own right. Both this ship and the Star of India are national historic landmarks and state historic landmarks. Medea, which hasn't been operating for a while, but we hope to get her restored and operating again. What she is, she'll be the last operational vessel that fought as a combatant in the First World War. The oldest one that fought in the last remaining one that fought in the first submarine campaign in history in the Atlantic in 1917 and 1918. So in addition to being a yacht, and one of 3 Edwardian yachts of the 1,000 or so that existed at one time, only one of 3 that's left, she's also extremely significant because of her participation in world events. We have a pilot, which has been hauled out for a while. We're trying to get her transmission fixed. She takes 16,000 people a year out on cruises, historic narrated cruises of San Diego Bay. And when she's up in the yard, her work is taken over by the Swift boat, PCF 816, which we acquired from the government of Malta. And she's now doing Bay cruises, but she does, her typical run is doing history of the Navy cruises. Often where the docents are veterans who fought on Swift boats in Vietnam. We have the Californian sitting back there that is an educational platform for living history and overnights and taking children out on the bay, but also when we do our out-of-area cruises, the afternoon sails that we do all the time. We have Surprise, which isn't sailing anymore, our movie star, but she takes you back to the world of the 18th century on a man of war, and also the kind of ships that initiated the great age of the Enlightenment voyages in the Pacific. USS Dolphin, located right over here, the deepest diving submarine in history, and significant for that reason alone. Many of the, much of the technology used on modern nuclear-powered submarines were developed initially and used on the USS Dolphin. And we have a bunch of small craft, like Butcher Boy, which was sailing recently, and Wings. And our most recent one, the Scrimshaw, which is seen over there. And I was hoping she'd be out sailing, taking people on day sails by now, so we're always a little bit late to things sometimes, but she will get going and operating during the week, taking people on day sails on days when we'll never get enough passengers to justify taking the Starsman and taking the Californian or the San Salvador out. And of course, the San Salvador, which we built ourselves. I'm going to kind of move this kind of fast because I think I'm maybe going over a bit. So anyway, so here we go. We have an org chart, right? There's no resemblance to the way we actually are, okay? Because it's much more hierarchical and organized, whereas I think our true organization is a lot more tribal than what, in an org chart. But we have one, if you're ever wondering, and here it is, and it kind of resembles what we do. I actually think it's much more fun to talk about what it is, the different kinds of things we do. So we have revenue centers, and this is how we do our budget. We have admissions, education, the museum store, events, private events, for instance, with public events also, intellectual property, membership development, publications, and grants. Those are all things that bring money in. And then there are things that don't bring money in. Money only flows out the other way. That's trips and collections and general and admin. And the things on the left support the things on the right, as well as supporting their own efforts. At the end of the day, we come up presumably with a balanced budget. Now I can say that in 30 years, we finished in the black 28 out of those. Never by a lot, but when we finished in the red, that wasn't by a lot either. So it was really hard to do. We have to make a lot of hard decisions sometimes, but we typically finish in the black. And usually, we end up at the end of the year with our budgets within about 1% of what we predicted at the beginning. So we've gotten to be pretty good at that. If you look at how these revenue centers are distributed, the largest single one is admissions. So we function in many ways more like an attraction than most museums do. A few years ago, I don't know what the case is now, but the Natural History Museum up in Balboa Park, only 3% of their budget is supported by admissions, okay? The Timken Museum is 0%, right? So in our case, it's more than 40% is supported by admissions. So people coming through the museum are really important to us. And then the other things are significant as well, such as education, grants, development, and so forth. If you look at how history is presented institutionally, and where are we on this? And I drew this axis some time ago when I was consulting for another museum. But what you see is two axes. Institutions are either entrepreneurial and business-like, or they're institutional, like universities or traditional museums. Or the other axis is they're all about antiquarianism, which is how closely you replicate a past world, versus historical, which is the explanation for cause. So, if you look at the different forms, you have living history in the upper left, living history parks, popular history in the upper right, you have academia in the lower right, and traditional museums in the lower left. And so as examples of that, you've got the History Channel being popular history, living history parks like Portsmouth, traditional museums like the Peabody Essex, and then you have academia in the lower right. And so where are we? We're kind of occupying all of those quadrants at various times. So we move around quite a bit. We're not pigeonholed in any one of those things. Some years ago, we identified some basic stories that we would tell, and those form our core exhibits: the age of exploration, harvesting the sea, so whaling, fishing, kelp, that sort of thing. Trade, oceanic and coastwise, the history of the bay itself. Recreation in the sea, the science of the sea oceanography, and sanding on the Navy. And today, when you walk around, you see an exhibit about each of those things. Many of them have not been changed fundamentally in a long time. And cross-cutting it all technologically, as we have ships representing the age of sail, the age of steam. And there were a few questions that we were posing years ago, but I'm going to go through this because I don't want to take too long on this. But ultimately, we get here. What's the relationship of the ship to civilization? Now, I think it's critical that you don't understand history without understanding maritime history. And therefore, there's an initiative I've been working on off and on for a long time, and I hope you'll be able to spend more time to it. And that is to have the world's great historic ships, Star of India being one of those, the whole group of them inscripted by UNESCO as one cross-boundary, cross-national World Heritage Site. Okay? They qualify by all the criteria that UNESCO uses. Ships are exemplary in that they fill every criteria. The interesting thing is there are maritime sites, that are World Heritage Sites, like Maritime Greenwich, or the place where the Vikings landed at Lanza Meadows, the Karlskrona Naval Complex in Sweden, Maritime Greenwich is the other one, but no ships. Even though ships are often the largest thing people saw, they're larger than the buildings that surround them often. They don't move around much. I mean, the Vasa only moved a few hundred yards ever, and it's not going to move again. So, the fact that they're not in one place is not an impediment most of the time. They are works of architecture, naval architecture, but architecture. You wouldn't say the Great Wall of China is an account because it's a work of military architecture. Why wouldn't you say the HMS Victory and the Star of India is an account because they're works of naval architecture? So that's the idea. I published a paper with a dear friend, Tim Runyon, who just passed away a few days ago, in Sea History, issue before last, and hopefully there'll be a bunch of us gathering together towards the end of the year to work on trying to make this happen. If that does, then ultimately it will take years to make it happen, but if the Star of India did ever become a World Heritage Site, that means she'd be on the same short list as the pyramids of the Great Wall of China or the Parthenon, which would be a pretty cool thing. In the meantime, we have our museum here, and our museum has certain issues that we have to deal with inherent to our site itself. We celebrate the achievements of ordinary people, not famous people or elites. So it's easier to fundraise for a symphony or an opera because that appeals to the identity of people who have lots of money in a community. But when you celebrate, the achievements of ordinary people can't usually write big checks, and so that has been a bit of an impediment. The ship collection is kind of eclectic. We're a museum presented as a monument so that people look at it and go, wow, that's beautiful. Okay, walk on. People look at the Statue of Liberty. It might be a great museum. In fact, there is one underneath the Statue of Liberty, but people just look at the statue and keep going. So they don't understand that there's a museum here because it's not in the building. The array of ships and multiple points of entry present a confusing impression. No matter how much we tell people, yes, it's all one museum. Yes, all the ships are one price. No, it doesn't include the Midway. So it's very difficult to get that across. People think museums have to be in buildings, right? And once I got a phone call from somebody, and he said, look, they directed me to you. I'm trying to find the Maritime Museum. I look for it, I can't find it anywhere. Can you give me directions? I said, sure, tell me where you're coming from. He goes, well, I'm on the Star of India right now. So that will give you a bit of an understanding of that issue. It's not a building, it's not a museum. Okay. Indoor museums have a series of galleries, Outdoor museums, living history parks like Colonial Williamsburg present a moment in time, whereas we present a series of living history experiences from different times. So that's also confusing. And then when you walk right up to ships, people don't want to buy a ticket. So we tested this. When we took the San Salvador to Monterey, people walked right up to it, and even though we sold tickets to only a few of them. On the other hand, when we took to Morro Bay, and everybody in Morro Bay could see her, but you couldn't get within 200 feet of San Salvador unless you bought a ticket, we sold 10,000 tickets over the course of a weekend. There's only like 2,000 people that live in Morro Bay. So it's really phenomenal. Now, just an interesting fact, when people would go up and they would say, how much money to see the pirate ship? And over and over again, we said, well, okay, look, if you want to see the Spanish galleon, it's $7. But if you really want to see the pirate ship, give me your wallet, your watch, and the keys to your car. So, they all think, people think they're all pirate ships. You know, you wonder how pirates ever earned a living if they were all pirate ships. There's no one left to plunder. And then gangways are uninviting. They seem to require permission. So a nice building plug someplace would actually be like the point of entry, which we don't have in this picture. And we also, at street level, don't have it because it's somewhat of a confusing thing. So, the idea is to go from topics to stories, and I'm just going to buzz through this a little bit here. Here's what we're talking about doing instead. There's just a building there, and it's transparent mostly, and you go right through it to where the museum is, and it's really the ships. Okay, it's this dramatic looking thing that looks like the bow of a ship parting the waves. And the idea behind that is it makes it obvious there's a museum. And so that is the grand initiative that I hoped I would get further along with before I retired, but I've handed that off in very capable hands with Christina. So I'm sure a few years from now we'll see that beautiful building there. And what I'll conclude with is this snippet of a little poem that I've always been enamored by that says that ships are the nearest thing to dreams that hands have ever made. And they cross the centuries to do that. Okay? All right, guys. Well, that is my story. Thanks a lot.
3 cheers to Dr. Ashley! Hooray! Hooray! Hooray!
Bob?
What?
Touchscreen doesn't seem to be working. Finally. It took work. Okay. The first European settlement in what today is California was the Mission San Diego de Alcalá and the Presidio. So basically the first settlement in California. And I only mention it because the city was founded in 1769. And our story begins in 1915, and you need to know how young San Diego.
The batteries are gone.
Diego was. Okay, it's decided to. Well, I will not let this bother me. 1915. Oh, this is, yes. The Panama Canal was completed at the end of 1914, and it was decided to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal with a World's Fair in San Francisco, the Panama Pacific International Exposition. But the people in San Diego thought, well, hey, we're closer than they are. We're going to be the first port of call after Panama, so why don't we have an exposition? So we went ahead and had our own exposition as well. They hoped that San Diego would become a hub for the railway network, the national railway network that was then being developed. And we know now that a direct rail route from San Diego to the eastern United States is impractical because of the mountainous terrain. But in 1915, they knew that too, but they didn't really care. Well, they overestimated the difficulties involved, underestimated the difficulties. The Panama California exhibition of 1915 was intended to advertise San Diego as a destination for business and visitors. And in those days, Balboa Park was mostly undeveloped. So they chose that as the site for the exposition. And the buildings were intended to be temporary, although in a speech from the Organ Pavilion, Theodore Roosevelt urged San Diego to keep them. We owe a great deal to the 1915 exposition. Its collection of, I love this picture. I had to have this picture. It's a postcard. But no, it has a river where the freeway is. I just love it. The collection of imported exotic animals for the 1915 exposition were used as the basis for the San Diego Zoo, which was founded by Dr. Harry Wegeforth. And the Zoological Society of San Diego was formed in October of 1916. And why does it not want to advance? I touch it and I touch it and I touch it, and it does nothing. Is there something wrong with my fingers? Ah, here we are. Dr. Harry Wegeforth, a name you all know if you've been to the zoo. The Zoological Society of San Diego had a plan to build an aquarium, which they thought could be housed in an historic ship moored in the harbour. And the 5 members of the aquarium committee included Dr. Harry Wegeforth and Jerry McMullen. And a lot of the information in this presentation is from Jerry McMullen's book, Star of India, The Log of an Iron Ship. And in that book he says, in the late summer of 1925, the Aquarium Committee discussed a New York Times article about an attempt to save an old sailing ship, the Benjamin F. Packard. There was a slight error in Jerry McMullen's book. It can't have been, because the item they were discussing was published on the 1st of November, and that's a bit late for summer even in San Diego. But the Packard's last voyage was in 1927. So eventually it was scuttled. Parts of its interior can still be seen at Misc. The Aquarium Committee had found several ships in Alameda that they thought were candidates for the putative aquarium. The Santa Clara, $7,500. Star of India, $9,000. Star of France, $12,000. Dunsire, $15,000. And Celtic Monarch, Christ forgotten. There were other vessels available, but they were all more expensive. And in an interview in 1981, Jerry McMullen said it was obvious we were going to have to work at the low end of the list if we expected to do it at all. The Santa Clara, the cheapest in their list, was American built, but it was wooden, and they didn't think it would last very long. So they took the next cheapest, which was the Star of India. So now the committee had to find $9,000 to buy her. Here's where I try and get this thing to cooperate. Something I'm doing wrong here.
You having trouble with it, Margaret?
I can't scroll. Ah, gotcha, finally. I have to push it 17 times to get there. Push it right there. Yeah, I know. It does work eventually. This is James Wood Coffroth. He was the top of the Aquarium Committee's list of potential donors. He was the head of the Agua Caliente racetrack, and he'd been a prize fight promoter. And the committee hoped he would give them a substantial donation that would encourage others to make up the total. But in fact, he gave the committee the entire purchase price. And there is a bronze plaque commemorating Sonny Jim on the tween deck of the Star. Oh, that worked better. The committee still had to find the money to tow the ship to San Diego. Commercial towing quoted to them at $325 a day, $1,750 flat fee, which was huge considering they only paid $9,000 for the ship. A cheaper alternative was proposed by Captain Walter A. Brunick. Gimpy Brunick, he walked with a slight limp. And this photograph is probably the worst one in my collection. Some of these old photographs don't have tremendous pixel count in them. So that's Captain Brunick in the center of this picture and Jerry McMullen on by the mast. Sorry? Okay. Where was I?
Bringing the star.
Captain Tim Runnick was unemployed, and he suggested that he should go to San Francisco and raise a skeleton crew and find some cheap towage. And he found the steam schooner Wapama was planning a voyage from San Francisco to San Pedro, and they charged $500 to tow Star of India that far. Now, the Aquarium Committee had approached the naval commanders at both San Pedro and San Diego for help getting the Star to San Diego, and a volunteer crew from San Diego, including Jerry McMullen and 2 serving Navy men, traveled to San Pedro aboard a Navy flying boat, and the Navy's minesweeper Tern tows the Star of India the rest of the way. Star of India arrived on the 9th of July, 1927. So, there you go. There. This is the Star of India, 9th of July 1927, arriving not in the world's best shape yet. So, 1927, we all know what happened in 1929. Very hard times came in the wake of the Wall Street crash. The aquarium plans never materialized. And the Star of India was trying to scrape a living any way they could. They sold the sails to a building contractor for $600, except for a jib and a lower topsail. The boiler, the donkey engine, its messenger chain was sold for scrap. They held an on-board production of HMS Pinafore, which, after expenses, netted $4.85. The public could come on board the ship for 10 cents. Jerry McMullen says 25 cents in the log of the Iron Ship, but that was in the 1950s. But it wasn't popular. People said it was just an empty old boat, which it was. And then the city required the berth at the foot of Ash Street for commercial purposes. The ship was moved to a berth near the foot of State Street, where the road was unpaved and the foot traffic was far lower, so it's all looking very poor for the Star of India. And the next one. This is our shameful past.
Oh my God.
Chapter 10 of the Log of an Iron Ship features an enterprising man who applied to become caretaker of the Star of India, claiming to have been shanghaied aboard her in New York in 1901. Knowing full well that the Star of India had never been in New York at all, they hired him anyway. And thinking his instincts as a showman would be worthwhile. And soon, lurid stories about the ship started appearing in the local newspaper. The calumny that the Star was once a slave ship dates from this time, and we still occasionally get earnest inquiries as to truth of this sensationalist lie. It was never a slave ship. It was never a convict ship. It was never a pirate ship. But, you know, if you can bring people in, you can tell the best story you can, I suppose. The local Sea Scouts had made a project of cleaning and painting staterooms aboard the Star, and as they were finished, the showman caretaker started moving in his relatives. And another caretaker said it was God's will after he smashed all the portholes with a sledgehammer. So Jerry McMullen doesn't mention the names of these interesting people from the Star's past, but he does mention, oh yes, there was another caretaker who allowed the hot pillow trade aboard the vessel on nights other than when the Sea Scouts were meeting, until the committee informed the police. He only mentions the caretakers by name when they are decent, upstanding people. They were selfless, they did their best for the old ship. The ones that I remember are Ed Fox, who was caretaker for something like 15 years, and his niece, Grace Hoff, lived on board for, well, McMullen says 17 years, but this plaque, which is from the museum's collection, it's not on display anywhere, says she lived on board for 18 years, and she became caretaker after Ed Fox died. So, yes?
What year or years was it advertised as a slave?
I can't tell you. The slave ship thing dates from the 1930s, I think. I'm really not sure. David?
The slave ship thing was from 1938.
38.
Which is, by the way, 20 years before the Maritime Museum of San Diego was founded.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
It's a pernicious lie.
Yes, it is a pernicious lie, but the people who believe it have their grounds. Jerry McMullen. He's a reporter and a historian, and he formed the Maritime Research Society in 1937 to promote preservation of the Star of India. Members of the Research Society contributed labour and modest funds and begged, borrowed and stole the materials they couldn't afford to buy. And since the Maritime Research Society was limited by its bylaws to 40 members, they started to be called the 40 Thieves. So let's see. Here we are. Let's move on from Jerry. This is the Star of India. During World War II, it was suggested that the star should be cut up for scrap to support the war effort. A government surveyor came from Los Angeles, Captain Albert Wilvers, who also happened to be a member of the Maritime Research Society of San Diego. After inspecting the ship, he reported that it was only iron, not steel, and mostly rust, and the cost of cutting her up would be more than she was worth. And later, when a friend of the ship commented on the poor condition that had been reported, he said, and I quote from Jerry McMullen, "Shut up, you idiot. She's as fit as a fiddle. Do you think I'd be a party to having that grand old lady cut up with torches, war or no war?" The ship was saved, but her upper masts and spars were removed at the direction of the US Navy, who saw them as a hazard for seaplanes. So notice this picture. She's missing the tops of her masts and the top spars, called the top hamper for those of you who have not come across that term before. The rigging was removed inexpertly, rendering it useless for future re-rigging. Shortly after the end of World War II, the Zoological Society of San Diego spun off the Aquarium Society of San Diego to deal with the Star of India. So, things are not looking great for the old gal. Alan Villiers. Ken Renard and Alan Villiers. The then famous Australian square rigger Captain Alan Villiers visited San Diego in 1957. Jerry McMullen persuaded him to visit the old U-turn. And McMullen also called the San Diego Union and arranged for a reporter to go as well. Villiers delivered a stinging rebuke to the city of San Diego through a subsequent article in the San Diego Union. In 1982, McMullen said that Villiers called the Star of India a bloody mess. This was enough to change minds from why don't we take it out and sink it to why don't we try and fix it up. About a week after the Union article, the port director John Bate called a meeting of what came to be known as the Star of India Restoration Committee. McMullen said that San Diego's debt to Jack Donnelly, who raised money for restoration, will never be repaid. He credited Ken Renard with insisting on a proper restoration, not just painting over the rust. In 1958, the year after Alan Villiers visited, the Maritime Museum of San Diego was incorporated. Yay! Now, restoration begins. Carl Corton did the initial survey of the Star of India before restoration began. Corton was the director of the Maritime Museum of San Francisco, which had restored the Balclutha. And he persuaded master rigger John Nickerhoff to come to San Diego to oversee the re-rigging. The re-rigging included the removal and repair of the badly rusted iron masts. I am not going to talk much about the restoration because there's going to be a whole presentation about the acquisition and restoration of the Star later in the series. But I love this picture. Anyone who has seen the companionway just by the steering wheel on the Star of India, we'll see quite how much work went into repairing this old ship. Where am I? McMullen, Roberts and Donnelly. The restoration started slowly, but in 1961, a bill passed in Congress which allowed the owners of the Star of India to be compensated for the damage caused when the masts and spars were removed at the Navy's direction. So this was a big deal. This was the real oomph to getting the Star restored. And in 1963, they celebrated the 100th anniversary of the launch of the Star of India, and that is Alan Villiers presenting the flag of the Shaw Savill Company to the museum at the 1963 centenary celebrations. So, and as I said, I'm not going to talk much about the restoration, but as you see, the idea that she might actually sail again became an objective between 1958 and 1976. They targeted 1976 for the United States bicentennial celebrations, and for the first time since 1923, the Star of India sailed again on the 4th of July, 1976. The museum has footage of this event in its collection. So, they did well. So, Star is our first ship, and our reason for being the next ship in our collection. Oh, right. Was the Butcher Boy. Butcher Boy was built in 1902 as a meat boat, a very fast single-handed sailing vessel whose purpose was to race out to tall incoming ships with fresh provisions. Butcher Boy went on to become a famous racing yacht. And in 1971, Joe Jessup, who was one of the earlier directors of the museum, found Butcher Boy in San Francisco Bay, I think it was, and had her Los Angeles. At the time of writing, Butcher Boy is being worked on at Spanish Landing, but you can see Joe Jessup's name on the plaque of Chairman of the Board of Directors on the wall over there, if you care to look. The next addition to our collection was the Berkeley. The 1898 steam ferry Berkeley was acquired in 1973, both as an exhibit and to provide administrative offices. There will be separate presentations about the Berkeley and the other major ships in our collection, so I'm just going to skate right over them and just tell you how we acquired our collection. But there is this picture that shows something that we haven't all seen before. It's Berkeley at the Oakland Pier. Between 1898 and the opening of the Oakland Bay Bridge in 1936, if you came by rail from New York to San Francisco, you would connect at Oakland and get on the Berkeley to finish your journey. So I thought that was worth seeing as we skate on through. Oh, come on. Medea. 1904 steam yacht Medea. It was restored and donated by Paul Whittier in 1973. And there'll be a presentation about that in week 5. Wings. PC, Pacific class, hull number 8, Wings, was built in 1931 and it's believed to be the oldest PC in existence. She was donated to the museum in 1983 by her last private owner, which was Paul Hartley. Oh, turned over too late. The next one was Pilot. The San Diego Harbor pilot boat Pilot was built in 1914 at the Goulart Boat Works in San Diego and served. Hello.
The pilot.
Yes. That's Kiki who gives the most wonderful tour of the pilot ship. And she's one of us. She's a docent. A very good one. She's the oldest wooden pilot boat. She was acquired by the museum in 1998, and she's the oldest wooden pilot boat in America. So,
And the oldest working boat on the West Coast.
really? Oh, right. California. In 2002, the Potica Family Foundation donated funds to the museum for the purchase of the topsail schooner California, the official tall ship of the state of California. At the time, it was the largest single donation in the museum's history. Hughes and Sheila Potica's daughter had enjoyed educational programs on board the California before it came to us. And a condition of the gift was that the educational programs should continue, so they do. 4, 5, there. The Monterey fishing boats were next in 2003. The 2 Monterey fishing boats, Marianne and La Diana. The boats and their owners were San Diego locals, and they tell a tale of the fishing industry. 4 this time, getting better at it. HMS Surprise. In 2003, after the movie Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World was complete, Fox Studios loaned the replica of the 1757 Royal Navy frigate HMS Rose to the museum. For the movie, it had been renamed as Surprise, and the museum has preserved this name. The museum was able to buy Surprise in 2004. And now a boat you will not see. The Foxtrot submarine B-39. In 2005, the museum acquired the Soviet attack submarine B-39, and for many years, it was a very popular exhibit. It attracted a surprising number of Russian visitors, so help me, I never went aboard it without hearing Russian being spoken. Sadly, the increasing deterioration of her hull led to her eventual scrapping in February 2022, so she is no longer with us. But the floating dock. The dock moored aft of the Berkeley, up there, Steel Car Float number 7, was launched on December 28, 1928. Floating dock SF7 was originally a railroad barge that carried rail cars across the San Francisco Bay. It was donated to the museum in 2008 by the Marine Group Boat Works, and in addition to mooring for larger vessels and display space for the smallest, it provides workshop and storage space down below. On top of, oops, go back. On top of the floating dock, as you see, it once had railway lines because it carried rail cars. This shot, I took this picture the other day, it shows the very end of the railway lines that you can just see at the end if you go right down to the water. On top of the floating dock is the Rascal. Rascal is thought to be the last remaining example of the Starlet class of small racing yachts. It was designed by George Kettenberg Jr. Kettenberg is right over there. Specifically for the junior boating program at the San Diego Yacht Club that was started by Joe Jessup. Rascal was acquired by the museum in 2008. Dolphin. In 2008, the United States Navy donated the research submarine USS Dolphin to the museum along with funds for her upkeep. While we had both the B-39 and the Dolphin, they made an interesting comparison. The Foxtrot was built in 1967 and was based on Second World War technology, while the Dolphin was built just 1 year later, but she was cutting edge for her time. So they were quite the comparison. The Swift boat. 2 Vietnam-era Swift boats were donated by the United States to Malta, where they were used as the equivalent of Coast Guard vessels. One of the 2 was badly damaged in an accident, but when the other was retired from service in 2011, the museum acquired it. And PCF 816 was lovingly restored by retired Swifties. and today takes visitors on tours around the bay. And the Galleon San Salvador. Early attempts to raise funds for the preservation of the Star of India in the late 1950s were challenged by a rival project to raise funds for a replica of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo's flagship, the San Salvador. That San Salvador project came to nothing. But the idea was realized when the museum finally built a representation of San Salvador, laying the keel in 2011 with her maiden voyage in 2016. There was a time while she was being built, between 2011 and 2016, that unkind people called it Ashley's Folly. But he had the last laugh when he got the knighthood from the King of Spain. I have no slide for COVID-19, but hard times came to the museum again in March of 2020 when the pandemic struck. We were fully closed for 5 months and partially open from August 2020 until the summer of 2021. People could walk around on a prescribed route through the museum on the outside only. It was all kind of scary. And as Dr. Ashley pointed out, most of our revenue comes from our ticket sales, so we were in desperate straits. Most of the staff had to be let go, and the remaining staff took pay cuts, and the skeleton crew did what had to be done. And we owe special thanks to Jim Davis, Alex Sakowski, and Dr. Ray Ashley, all of whom moved in to provide overnight security at the museum because we couldn't afford security staff anymore. This museum's only a little 501c charity, but it survived, owing to determined efforts by management and volunteers and donors. So, last slide, I think, if I can get it to 5, 6, 7, yes! Our latest acquisition, the 2-masted schooner Scrimshaw, was acquired in 2024. Scrimshaw is currently undergoing a great deal of repair, but when that's finished, the plan is to take small numbers of visitors on harbour tours on a regular basis. So that really is the end of the development of the history of the museum, not the end.
Well, kudos go to Margaret for adjusting her presentation for our rather challenging schedule today. So thank you, Margaret. Nancy.
Could I just 30 seconds?
Okay. I would like to add to Margaret and Ray's presentation that when Ray came to the museum 30 years ago, there was the Star, the Berkeley, and the Medea. All the rest you see was built during his tenure. And that makes the Maritime Museum of San Diego one of the top-rated maritime museums in the entire world. And in no place can you have such a hands-on living experience as you have here.